weight and drag on the side you want the kite to fly to. By combining the two in the correct proportion, they counterbalance each other in the gusts, resulting in an extremely stable tack over a huge wind range. When using the flexi-wing in strong winds, you reduce the keel rubber band from a 4-strand connection to a 2-strand connection. This ensures the pull is reduced to an easily manageable level. On a trip to Pakiri Beach after a severe easterly blow, we set out to fish with casting kites, flexi-wings and a big 1,500-metre dropper rig. On arriving at the beach, a blustery southeasterly was still blowing. The beach was absolutely covered in seaweed and there was probably more half submerged in the waves. We quickly decided that the flexi-wing and big rig should be used, as a 50-degree tack was required to achieve a fishable angle, which is way beyond what a pocket sled is capable of. By the time we had the conventionally rigged 1,500-metre sand dropper out to its full distance, the first flexi-wing set was being hauled in. Jim Ellerton, one of New Zealand's most experienced pocket sled and flexi-wing fishermen, was operating it. Jim's reel was spooled with 1,000 metres of 70-pound Kevlar line, and he frequently sets up to 10 hooks on this rig. He'd fitted an untacked pocket sled about 400 metres back from the flexi-wing, and despite creating a dog leg in the main line, this had successfully kept the line out of the weedy water out to 900 metres offshore. His hooks weren't so lucky. The weed was obviously going to cause problems, but he did have one kahawai. The second flexi-wing set was put out with less weight on it in an attempt to set the gear out nearer the surface and hopefully above the mass of sunken drifting weed which the storm had torn from nearby reefs. The results were slightly better. We even snagged a paddle crab for the entree. For the final flexi-wing shot, the weight was reduced even further, with only 2 ounces on the front of the hook section, which travelled out over the weed, sinking to the bottom only when fully out. And this did the trick, returning these 3 snapper from the 4-hook set and no weed. The big rig was a dead loss. After being set for over 2 hours, the 20 hooks caught enough weed to fertilise the veggie garden, but only 1 gurnard. At least we'd caught something and learned yet again, it's not how many hooks you run that determines what you catch, it's how many you set correctly on the day.
Well, this is my favourite rig. It's the mid-range dropper rig that I prefer. It's a Penn 9-bar. It's one of the older ones. In fact, it's about 20 years old. It's caught heaps of fish in its life. I've had it for the last 5 years and I've caught truckloads. The biggest fish I've taken on it is a 250-pound bronze whaler. Took me an hour and a half to land it, but I got it in no trouble. I've got it spooled with 1,300 metres of 20 kg purlon line, and I power it with a flexi-wing kite. On the east coast I can run up to 10 hooks, and on the west coast I can run up to 5. It's a lot more economical in effort than the smaller casting kites, which can only run maybe 2 or 3 hooks on 8 to 15 kg gear. This is big gear, can handle big catches. A lot of people ask me why I have the reel on upside down and backwards. Well, the answer to that's quite simple. I've got a nice firm board there on the top of my chili bin. I just sit on the rod butt, and I can crank anything in on this sucker. Piece of cake. And if it gets too tight, all I've got to do is stop and leave it for a while. I don't get any back strain or anything like that. And the kite, as it's trying to lift the drop line back after being wound down through the tension, will be inclined to bring the fish towards you. And as long as you take about a 50-metre bite on really big fish about every 10 minutes, you could land anything. Not everybody's entirely happy to wind in fish with the assistance of a kite, and some actually want to just play the fish so that they can feel it and it's not hindered by the action of the kite. Those that choose to do that, all they need is 2 rods, and you terminate 1 rig at the bottle, fit a release clip to it, and then you attach the end of your other line to the release clip. You let both lines run out, and then as soon as the gear gets out to the desired distance, you just lock up the reel on the rod that you're casting from, and as soon as it reaches that distance, it'll just release. Drop your gear, and then you can retrieve your fish unassisted by kites, and also obviously you're eligible for all IGFA records.
We don't rely on knots when joining lines under 37 kg breaking strain. So to join the critical lines between the rod and kites like the pocket sled and flexi wing, we splice them instead of tying knots in the smaller diameter lines used. The shock cord is made from Dacron, which is double the breaking strain of the lines it joins. It's also hollow, so we start by threading the mono line up inside the Dacron and working it up for a metre. This braided join would actually hold on its own, but we add further security by tying a whipping knot to bind the end of the Dacron. This compresses it onto the nylon and prevents it being pushed off by the rod tip. After doing 6 turns around the main line with the light line, we cross the light line, then do another 6 turns inside the loop. Now this knot should only be pulled up loosely so it can be moved along into the correct position, because we're going to add a second one for further security before being tightened. And when you tighten it, pull hard until the knot actually goes shiny, which is the wax being forced out of the material. It can run through the eyes of the rod and actually outlasts the nylon line itself. It also has multi-uses. You can join 2 sections of nylon or add a Dacron shock cord at the end of a mono line to attach a clip, or add a blood loop in the middle of the Dacron section for hanging a bottle or another shock cord. Always ensure there is sufficient Dacron without mono inside it to form any knot or loop. The kite-powered bottom long line is an extremely productive rig. It can be fished in some pretty horrendous conditions. Big surf and strong rips on the west coast can leave many anglers frustrated, but as we learn, even the strongest of rips can be fished successfully with a longline kite rig. The standard bottom long line requires a large enough beach reel to accommodate at least 1,000 metres of 100 kilo line or heavier, the 100 metres of 48 kilogram kite line, plus the cord for the flag and bottle. The kite tows out 1,000 to 2,000 metres of main line over a clear sandy bottom, with the traces connected directly onto the main line. The whole system is designed to keep the baits on the bottom. The continuous long line is made up of 4 parts. The 100 metres of 40 kilogram line between the kite and the bottle, which stops the kite lifting the line. A 150 to 200 metre leader section where weights are also attached to ensure the hooks stay on the bottom when the gear is fully out and fishing. The hook section with up to 25 hooks, and then the main line, which gives the required distance offshore. Because a long line is physically dragged out along the bottom, you need a hard wearing line that resists abrasion. We've found Purlon to be the best for this. A minimum breaking strain of 65 to 80 kg is fine for the east coast, but on the west coast you can hook into some huge fish. Snapper over 20 pounds, sharks and stingrays all add up to a lot of weight on the line. To be safe, on the west coast a 100 kilogram Purlon main line is recommended. There are several different ways of attaching the traces to the line. The most popular is the running clip system that requires stoppers or crimps on the line to keep the traces apart and allows the main line to rotate freely without twisting the trace. Another option is pre-stoppered main line from Seafish Systems, which retains 100% of the breaking strain of the line. This is now preferred by many in the commercial fishing industry. The more traditional triangle clip is still used, but this can reduce the catch rate because the traces are inclined to become twisted around the main line. Back in 1990, we took a film crew out to the west coast on the leading edge of a cyclone to show them how kite fishing was done. With winds of 25 gusting to 35 knots, only 30 degrees offshore, we were glad to have the skyhook, otherwise we may as well have packed up and gone home. With the wind blowing at such a shallow angle down the beach, we had a lot of trouble with turbulence. Getting the bottle weighted correctly for the conditions was the next problem. We found that while there was sufficient sand in the bottle for the 25-knot winds, it was drastically underweighted in the strong gusts. With the front fast approaching, we had just enough time to get 1, possibly 2 sets out if we were lucky, but we had to do it quickly. 4 2-ounce weights were clipped onto the leader line just prior to the hook section. You should note that these small weights, even in these conditions, were plenty for the kite technology we had then. Today, in the same conditions, you'd need 2 2-litre bottles of sand and up to 4 pounds of lead on the line. So great is the increased performance and efficiency of the modern kites. With the traces attached in the same fashion as demonstrated earlier with the sand dropper rig, clipping one trace on and letting 2 crimps go before clipping on the next one, the gear was on its way out. It quickly became obvious, though, that the rip was going to be a problem, and the gear wound up being set at only 30 degrees offshore. This wasn't looking good. Around 20 minutes later, when we retrieved it, our worst fears were realised. I suppose many people would be happy with a line full of kahawai, particularly this size, but that's not what we came for. We wanted at least a few gurnard and hopefully some snapper, and the line would have to be set out a lot straighter to achieve that. Okay, time for a team talk. The tack on the kites is perfect, but we've got to find a way of beating that rip. After much deliberation, the running shot was invented. One person walks up the beach, dragging the bottle, the kites and the main line in the direction against the way the rip is running. Another mans the reel, clipping on weights and baited traces as the line is being pulled off the reel. Once all the traces are on, a hand signal from the guy on the reel lets the other one know it's time to put the bottle into the water. The bloke on the bottle then continues to pull the main line off the reel and up the beach and feeds the line out into the water while walking back towards the reel abreast of the bottle. Because of the strong rips on this day, we finished up having to carry the bottle while dragging the baited traces and weights 500 metres up the beach. It worked so well that the person at the bottle was pulling line off the reel twice as fast as he was walking back down the beach. And by the time he got back to the reel, all the main line was off the reel and the gear was dead straight out in front of us. We secured the line under the toe of the reel to keep it hard on the beach. This prevents the tension of the line from pulling the reel over and also makes it safe for any vehicles that may pass inside your gear. Wrapping a cloth or some plastic around the line here is also a good idea to prevent any scuffing on the line. The long line remained square offshore for around 10 minutes before the rip began to take effect and carry the line along the beach again. 10 minutes stationary time on the west coast, however, is plenty. Once again, we retrieved the gear, but with much different results this time. When you retrieve your line, it's possible to read the gear and tell if you've got it set correctly. There's very little that can go wrong with the bottom long line, and fixing a problem is generally as easy as adding or deducting weight from the main line. If the majority of your fish return on the shore side of the line, or kahawai is your main catch, then the main line has been underweighted and is lifting off the bottom. An underweighted line results in the main line vibrating, which tends to scare the more desirable snapper and gurnard away. If the line returns with no fish and no bait, then the gear has more than likely been overweighted and the crabs have had a field day in taking your baits. Or the bait you've used has been too soft to last the distance. A firm, fresh bait is always best. Well, with our second set weighted correctly, the running shot certainly paid off. We wound up with a very satisfying catch for the day in marginal conditions. We had a mixture of gurnard, snapper, kahawai, trevally and sharks. There are two things to be said for the bottom long line. It's undoubtedly the most productive of all the kite fishing systems, and it's certainly the simplest to use. 5 years ago, the running shot technique solved the problem of the fierce rip along the beach, but now we have two other solutions to this problem that can occur on the west coast when the surf is over 2 metres. The actual problem area is only 300 to 400 metres wide, close to the beach. So if you replace the leader section with 500 metres of 65 kg purlon line, which has less drag than the main line, you start with your kite and bottle well out past the rip and clean wind, able to pull the thicker main line out through the current more effectively. Another major benefit is that you only need half as much weight as the kite is so much further away from the hooks. You also beat the crabs because the gear moves faster, and you catch more fish because the baits are guaranteed to be on the bottom. It's the ultimate West Coast solution. Alternatively, you can use the huge megamouth kite, which delivers 10 to 12 kilos of pull in only 15 knots of wind. This brute force easily pulls your bottle and long line out through the rip. Here is one